Good morning. Thank you for coming back from the break. So before the break, as you saw 3 examples of emerging countries, economies, now you will see 3 examples of emerged, developed economies. In my case, Javier and I, we will talk to you about California. Well, California, the dreamland, or at least that's what we think in Europe, is the place where if you go with a good idea, you will just be backed up by tons of money from venture capital. You will develop your business, you will be a millionaire, or if you're lucky, a billionaire in a very short time. Now, let's give a reality check to this. The situation is actually slightly more complex than that. In December 2013, California faced a ballot, so a proposal to split California in 6 states. It was proposed by venture capitalists. And it reached 800,000 signatures. So 800,000 people wanted to split California in 6 states. That's something unusual. Was it something foreseeable, especially with this, keeping this in mind, such a dreamland? Well, maybe it was the income distribution within California. Or maybe it's too large to be governed. Maybe it's better served by smaller government, local. It requires some policy changes, or maybe the regional priorities are currently not well addressed. Now, let's use a framework to analyze the economy and the political and social setup of California. We will look at growth and distribution, so economic output, key sectors, etc. Employment, labor market, immigration, trade balance. Then we will look at the goals from a governmental perspective. Then we will look at public finance, regulatory competition. I will synthesize it, and at the end of the session, together with the other 2 emerged economies, we will talk about the implication for business. Let's start from the growth and the economy itself. As most of you know, California is a very large economy. It's the largest state in the US, so the largest economy within US. If you think of California as a country, it would be, in nominal terms, bigger than Italy and on par with Brazil. So we are talking about a very large economy, 2.2 trillion. Now, if you look at the performance, so the GDP growth and the GDP per capita is actually average within the US. It grew 2.7 in the last 15 years, while US grew 2.8, so it's actually average. It's not really the dreamland that everyone thinks of. Now, what are the factors that are driving or hindering growth? Let's look at California from an industry perspective, so an industry analysis. Most of us think of California as the mecca of high tech, but if you look at the industries, is actually the picture you see here is very similar to any developed economy, where the sector, the service industry plays the major role, but there is also industry, manufacturing, and agriculture. Some of the industries, for example, mining, as you can see, or agriculture, they grew faster than others, but their impact on the overall economy was limited. So the overall growth was actually on par with US. Now, let's do a deep dive into agriculture, because basically most of the land in California is used to produce agricultural products, and is also critical for the food security of the whole nation. 1 meal out of 3 in US contains food from California. 70% of the products, agricultural products in US comes from California. So it is a very critical industry for the California GDP and also for the whole nation. Now, the agricultural industry grew faster than others in California, 8%, but similar to other industry, and we will talk about it a bit later, the growth was hindered by an outdated infrastructure. Most of you heard of the water scarcity issue. The water scarcity caused losses and hindered the growth of this industry, just because basically there was not enough water to grow the crops in the land. Now, another very important aspect of California is, of course, the Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, it is a unique environment, is what we think of the whole California, but if you look at what it is, it takes only 1.2% of the land, so it's basically around the San Francisco Bay. But it contributes 15% to the overall GDP. So it's an amazing result of a unique mixture of talent inflow, finance, and the best university and research center in the world, and the overall mentality of innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, even Silicon Valley, which is the flagship of the California dream, is facing some challenges. Let's say the most critical one is to keep attracting talents, because it's competing against other innovation hubs, and the rising cost of living, which are moving already some people, some companies outside this area. Let's look at infrastructure. Infrastructure is another very important aspect of the growth that is hindering the growth of California. The state is slightly better than US, but considering the huge inflow of people that I will show you later, it's not up to date. It's completely outdated, and an example of it is the water scarcity that caused the agricultural problems. Now, research estimates that to bring the current infrastructure up to a state of art, to something that we have here in Switzerland, for example, it would require an investment of $65 billion per year. And currently, in the budget of the state government, there is less than 1/5 of that. So also looking forward, this is a major challenge for California, especially thinking about the debt situation that we will talk about it. Now, another very key aspect is the education. California faces a gap between the top university elite, so you have Stanford, Berkeley, where the elite of the world get educated, which produces what you see in Silicon Valley, the best companies and millionaires. And on the other hand, you have the poorest public education system. Like you can see, it's scoring 46 out of 50 states. So we're talking about a huge gap between in the overall education system, which has a strong impact also on the skill of the overall workforce. On the same line, California is split in terms of income distribution. California has the largest amount of billionaires in the US. And if you consider California as a country, it would be the third in the world. So after US and China, then the most billionaires would be in California. At the same time, you have the highest poverty rate. So you have basically the IT moguls, Zuckerberg or Google, the big IT companies that produce a lot of billionaires, and at the same time, a lot of unskilled workers employed in the agricultural industry that make minimum wage, or sometimes when they work in the informal economy, they don't even make a minimum wage. So there is high income inequality and large differences among counties and among ethnicity and immigration status, so US-born versus immigrant. As you can see here, a picture of the concentration of wealth. Most of it is in the Bay Area, while in the north and in the south, which are more agricultural counties, the poverty is much higher. Let's look at the labor force. The labor force has increased as a result of immigration, because California is a land of immigrants. The population and the labor force has increased in the last century. We take since the last 50 years. But the economy itself has not been able all the time to provide jobs to everyone. And as you can see, the unemployment rate is cyclical, and it's now the economy is returning to a healthy state, so it's going down. A challenge for the state at the moment is a result of the great immigration policy that the Obama administration is trying to enforce, to legalize immigrants. This will have a boost to the formal economy of California and will increase the number of taxpayers. On the other hand, it will incentivize more illegal immigrants, typically unskilled, to move to California. And of course, the question is, will the economy of California be able to generate enough jobs for all these immigrants? Now, let's move. We looked at the growth, the economy, the distribution of wealth, and unemployment and labor force. And now we move on to the trade balance.
Good morning, everyone. So indeed, trade balance is also one of the challenges of this economy. As you can see, it has reached relative and sustainable levels. It is 10% of the GDP. Each year, 10% goes as outflows. Is this a real problem? Well, when you compare it to the state financials, it's nearly something, and it's increasing, 5% annually. Main traders with China and Mexico, which are partners. But, well, if you look at the whole ecosystem, it could hinder the state finances. Why? Because they have revenues, they're volatile. These revenues are mainly dependent on the income tax. It is quite unusual, but it is not a country, it is a state. So in this case, the people are actually paying for most of it directly. Corporations, as you see, very small share, only 6%. Various reasons for that. On the other side, you have the spending. Typically, health, social policies, education, here they reach 70% of the total. What does that mean? It means that the share that is actually growing represents the biggest part of it. So will probably lead to some kind of unbalance. So debt. Indeed, debt is not a new problem in California. It has been accumulating for the last years. And well, they have used a special, let's say, way of counting. Officially, it's not such a big issue. When you take into account the whole liabilities, it is big. It is 3.5 times the budget yearly for this kind of state, quite enormous. And California has the biggest amount of debt per capita and as a whole in the US. So, well, this has consequences, of course, for the future, but also today. You have 4 cities which are already bankrupt. So it is actual, and it is talked every day in the political scene. The main trends are not really helping, actually. Aging population, health costs all around, and also on the political side, there's some problems that would actually hinder the revenue side. So we should maybe think about something more inspiring, but if we look into opportunities, maybe corporate. But today, well, most of Californian corporations, big ones, everybody knows them, they're not paying taxes actually in California. Everybody heard about these offshore tactics. Well, this is a specific one. Double Irish style is called. Not into details. All the international sales do not come back to the source. So these big companies, Apple, Oracle, Google, Qualcomm, they have $300 billion that are sitting in cash offshore and will never come back to the headquarters, having paid very low taxes. So this seems kind of a constrained place, and the solution should be political. When we look at the other side of the trade, the cost of doing business, so the regulatory competition, lower side of the framework, we see that actually, well, California faces a lot of competition inside US. As you can see, it is the place where it's most expensive to do business in the West Coast. And well, this is mainly a problem for the poor regions. The rich IT companies, they can manage this. They're very performant. On the other side, entrepreneurs, and the rich parts of California, they really suffer. So in order to do this, well, long-term alignment, political will, for that you need a political space, political landscape, where you have alignment. Today, it's highly polarized. You have mainly Democrats on the state level, representatives, and governors are Republican. Independents are rising on the other side, mainly for ecological reasons and others. It is very difficult to take decisions in this political landscape. And actually, they have been delayed the last years. You heard about infrastructure, you heard about other things, mainly related to water. So at the end, Californians, they lose traction related to politics, but it's the main thing that could help them. And, well, this problem of cohesion could actually lead to what we talked at the beginning, maybe a cession of California. So 6 Californias, what would that mean? It would mean that Silicon Valley will lead the way. Everybody heard about it. And actually, they're really different than the average. They're even more different if you compare annual wages. Look at Jefferson, look at Silicon Valley, a little bit less than 3 times more. If you look at the personal income tax, it's similar. They pay most of what is actually given to the state level. So you can understand they feel there is a kind of imbalance. So why is it? It's because there's diversity. Obviously, high tech and agriculture, they don't have the same margins. So if you have this imbalance, if you have this diversity, you need to manage it. Question is how? Well, Europe is a very diverse place. Everybody knows that. Could it be an example for California? In Europe, you have the Eurozone for currency, you have the European Union, mainly political, free flow of capitals, of people, and a lot of other things go along. You have the Schengen area, no borders except the outside. You have, well, quite some other actual groups. It's not such a simple place. Even the Vatican around, I mean, what's the relation with California? There would be some advantages if they decentralize. It would be easier to adapt locally, to have different taxes for businesses in Silicon Valley or in the north. They would be more responsive, but at the same time, big burden of separation. And, well, if you want to coordinate structural changes, well, maybe not the best way. So if we sum up and want to give some propositions in order to help the cohesion and not split this region, well, a big legislation reform is needed so that decisions are easily made and faster. The debt problem goes along with the pension system and security system. Today, extremely expensive and probably should not cover everybody. And then the biggest part, education and how do you integrate immigrants? Because, I mean, if you let diversity grow, you don't help the people that actually need it, won't get better. And, well, this is something that has really been tackled lately. The last 2 weeks, there's been some news where they are actually checking how the increase in educational budget is being used for the lowest performance students, for the ones that need it the most. So today we have seen that California had a lot of challenges, although it is a privileged place. Average performance is not that good. So what does it mean when you have the most dynamic region with innovation, industry, Silicon Valley? Well, it means there is diversity and there is also a threat of lack of cohesion. So in order to face this specific problem, well, some structural reforms are needed. You talked about infrastructure, we talked about cost of doing businesses, and the political side. So finally, California is definitely a land of differences, but also a land of opportunity. Needs to be tackled. Thank you.